when one American invention saved thousands of soldiers, and the enemy never noticed. At 6:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944, the most powerful invasion force in human history was drifting in rough seas off the coast of France. More than 150,000 American, British, and Canadian soldiers were packed into ships, staring at a gray horizon called Normandy. If this landing failed, the war in Europe would not just be delayed. It might be lost. German artillery waited behind concrete bunkers. Machine guns were already zeroed in on the beaches. Every Allied commander knew the truth. Getting soldiers from the ships to the sand was the most dangerous part of the entire operation. Men could fight, men could shoot, but they still had to get ashore. And in the early hours of D-Day, something terrifying became clear. The invasion was about to depend on one simple piece of equipment. Not a tank, not a bomber, not a battleship, a boat, because without it, thousands of men would never even make it to the fight. And most of them had no idea their lives now depended on something designed by a stubborn American civilian the army almost ignored. The Allied invasion plan looked perfect on paper. Naval guns would smash the German defenses, bombers would soften the beaches, then infantry would land and push inland. But reality hit hard in the English Channel. The seas were rough, the tides were wrong, and the beaches of Normandy were nothing like planners expected. Most landing craft couldn't survive the approach. Some were too deep and hit underwater obstacles. Others were too slow and became floating targets. Many swamped in heavy waves, drowning soldiers before they ever fired a shot. On Omaha Beach alone, entire units were wiped out before reaching dry sand. Commanders watching from offshore realized something horrifying. If the next waves failed, the invasion would collapse in hours. No reinforcements, no ammunition, no wounded evacuated. The invasion force needed a way to cross rough seas, land directly on open beaches, survive enemy fire, and unload men fast. There was only one design that could do all four, and almost no one believed in it, because it came from a man who wasn't a general, wasn't a sailor, and had no combat experience at all. Just an idea. Years before D-Day, an American engineer named Andrew Higgins had been building boats in New Orleans swamps. Not warships, not destroyers. Shallow, ugly workboats that could slide over mud, sandbars, and riverbanks. They weren't elegant. They weren't fast. But they could go where nothing else could, Higgins added. One strange feature that Navy designers hated. A front ramp. Naval officers said it was weak. They said it would fail under fire. They said no enemy would ever allow a boat to drive straight onto a beach. Higgins ignored them. He demonstrated the boat by slamming it onto a shoreline, dropping the ramp, and unloading men in seconds. No climbing over sides, no jumping into deep water, no chaos. Still, the Navy hesitated, until British observers saw the design. One of them sent a blunt message back to London. Without this boat, the war cannot be won. The landing craft was named LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. Most soldiers called it something else, the Higgins boat. And in 1944, thousands of them were about to face the most heavily defended coastline on Earth. June 6, 1944. Dawn over Normandy was gray, cold, and violent. German bunkers sat above the beaches, concrete teeth packed with machine guns, artillery, and mortars. Every approach was measured. Every firing angle pre-calculated. The Atlantic Wall was designed to do one thing: turn landing troops into bodies before they reached land. In earlier amphibious assaults, soldiers had to climb over the sides of boats, jump into chest-deep water, and wade forward under fire. Many drowned before ever firing a shot. This time was different. As Higgins' boat slammed onto the sand, ramps dropped forward, not sideways, not into the surf, straight onto the beach. Men ran forward instead of down. Vehicles rolled out instead of sinking. Wounded were dragged back instead of left behind. German gunners were trained to target men struggling in water. They weren't prepared for entire units hitting the sand already moving. At Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword, thousands of ramps dropped almost simultaneously. What should have been minutes of chaos became seconds of movement. And seconds were everything. By nightfall, more than 156,000 Allied troops were ashore. Casualties were still horrific. But without that ramp, many historians agree, D-Day would have failed. And if D-Day failed, the war would have dragged on, maybe years longer. Dwight D. Eisenhower never took credit lightly. After D-Day, reporters praised generals, divisions, and tactics. Headlines talked about courage, sacrifice, and overwhelming force. But in private meetings, Eisenhower said something few people ever heard. He told his staff that the invasion of Europe depended on three things: air superiority, naval dominance, and the ability to land men fast. He didn't name a general. He named a boat. Eisenhower later said that, without the landing craft used on June 6th, the Allies could not have established a beachhead anywhere in Europe. Not in France. Not in Italy. Not in North Africa. No ramps meant soldiers stuck in water. No ramps meant vehicles lost to the surf. No ramps meant wounded, dying before medics reached them. The Germans understood this weakness. That's why they built their defenses assuming attackers would be slow, exposed, and disorganized in the first minutes. Higgins' design broke that assumption. It didn't overpower German defenses. It invalidated them. By the end of the first day, Allied engineers were already unloading artillery, fuel, tanks, and trucks onto beaches that were supposed to be impassable. The invasion was no longer a gamble. It was irreversible. And the man who made it possible was still thousands of miles away, standing in a factory, watching boats roll off an assembly line. By the time American troops were fighting across France, Andrew Higgins was running something closer to a wartime city than a factory. New Orleans had become the center of an industrial miracle no one expected. Higgins Industries operated 7 massive plants spread across Louisiana. Inside them, more than 30,000 workers labored around the clock. Welders, carpenters, riveters, engineers, teenagers fresh out of school, retirees brought back to work, women who had never touched industrial tools before the war. Many had never even seen the ocean, yet they were building the machines that would decide the fate of Europe. Every day, completed landing craft rolled out in numbers that stunned Navy inspectors. Boats were launched directly into nearby waterways, engines already mounted, ramps tested, hulls sealed. The process was so efficient that Higgins could produce a finished landing craft faster than Ford produced a car. At peak output, Higgins Industries delivered 1 landing craft every 92 minutes, not per factory, across the entire operation. No other manufacturer in the world could match that pace. The U.S. Navy had initially doubted Higgins. His methods were unconventional. His factories ignored rigid military hierarchy. He hired anyone who could work, regardless of race or gender. At a time when segregation ruled American industry, Higgins integrated his workforce because he didn't care about tradition. He cared about results, and the results were undeniable. By 1944, Allied planners had stopped asking whether Higgins' boats would be available. They assumed they would. Entire invasion schedules were built around Higgins's production timelines. Ship convoys departed American ports already knowing exactly how many landing craft would be waiting for them in Britain. This reliability changed how the war was planned. Operations were no longer constrained by scarcity. They were limited only by strategy. Higgins himself rarely appeared in photographs. He avoided ceremonies. When officers visited his factories, he gave them hard hats and sent them onto the floor instead of into offices. "Watch the boats," he told them. "They'll tell you everything you need to know." And the boats told a clear story. Wherever Americans landed, Africa, Italy, France, the Pacific, Higgins boats were there first. But their greatest test was still ahead. While Higgins boats were tearing open the beaches of Europe, they were also fighting a completely different war on the other side of the planet, the Pacific. There were no long beaches like Normandy, no gentle slopes, no wide, open landings. Instead, American forces faced coral reefs, jungle-covered islands, and beaches protected by cliffs and pillboxes. Traditional landing craft couldn't get close. They grounded on reefs, forcing Marines to wade hundreds of yards under fire. Again, the war revealed a flaw, and again, Higgins adapted. Using the same shallow draft hull philosophy, his teams modified landing craft to handle reef environments. These boats could climb over coral formations that stopped other vessels dead. They brought Marines close enough to sprint, not crawl. At Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, Higgins' boats became lifelines. They didn't just deliver troops. They evacuated wounded. They hauled ammunition forward. They carried flamethrowers, mortars, and light tanks straight into hell. Marines trusted them. They gave the boats nicknames. They painted slogans on the ramps. Some even credited specific boats with saving their lives. A common phrase spread through the Pacific: "If the Higgins boat reaches the beach, you'll live long enough to fight." That wasn't exaggeration. Marine casualty rates dropped sharply in units that landed directly from Higgins' craft instead of older designs. The boats didn't win firefights. They prevented disasters. By 1945, the United States had conducted more amphibious landings than any nation in history. Every one of them depended on Higgins's concept. The man himself remained uneasy. He knew something most people didn't. The boats were expendable. Men were not. That belief drove every design decision. Strong ramps, wide exits, shallow drafts, easy repairs. He built boats, assuming they would be destroyed, so the men inside wouldn't be. When the war ended in 1945, America celebrated generals, pilots, and battles. Factories went quiet. Contracts were canceled overnight. Wartime heroes returned home to parades. Andrew Higgins did not get one. Within months, Higgins' industries collapsed. The same government that had depended on his boats no longer needed them. Orders stopped. Credit disappeared. Factories closed. Tens of thousands of workers were laid off. Higgins himself was nearly bankrupt. It was a brutal ending for a man whose invention had carried entire armies across oceans. No statue was built. No ticker-tape parade followed. No national holiday marked his contribution. For years his name faded from public memory. Yet the military never forgot. Inside the Pentagon, amphibious doctrine was rewritten with one assumption: future wars would require rapid landings, exactly like the ones Higgins made possible. Every post-war landing craft, from Korea to Vietnam, traced its design directly back to his original idea. Even Eisenhower tried to correct the record. When asked late in life who truly enabled D-Day, he answered without hesitation: Andrew Higgins. He is the man who won the war for us. Those words didn't make headlines, but historians listened. Slowly, Higgins's reputation returned, not as a businessman, but as something more important. An engineer who understood combat realities better than many generals. He died in 1952, quietly, without wealth, without fame. But his boats never stopped landing. It's hard to understand Andrew Higgins's impact until you see the numbers laid out. By the end of World War II, Higgins Industries had produced more than 23,000 landing craft. Not planes, not rifles, not trucks, boats. Those boats carried an estimated 3 million Allied soldiers onto hostile shores. They transported hundreds of thousands of vehicles from jeeps to tanks. They delivered food, fuel, ammunition, radios, medics, engineers, everything an army needs to survive once it touches land. Every major Allied amphibious operation relied on them. Operation Torch in North Africa, the invasion of Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, Normandy, southern France, dozens of Pacific Island assaults. Remove Higgins boats from that list and the timeline of the war collapses. In 1942, the Allies had no reliable way to land forces against defended beaches. By 1944, they could do it anywhere in the world, at scale, repeatedly. That transformation didn't come from a new general or a secret weapon. It came from a simple mechanical idea, executed perfectly. Military analysts later calculated that, without Higgins's landing craft, the invasion of Europe would have been delayed by at least 1 to 2 years. That delay would have meant millions more deaths, on battlefields, in bombed cities, and in occupied territories. One design shortened the war. One design saved lives, not by killing enemies, but by delivering soldiers faster, safer, and in fighting condition. That's why historians quietly rank Higgins alongside radar, the Jeep, and the Liberty ship as one of the true war-winning technologies. But the final irony remains. Higgins never called himself a hero. He called himself a problem solver. Andrew Higgins never fought on the front lines. He didn't command armies. He didn't plan invasions. Yet by the time World War II ended, his small factory in New Orleans had reshaped modern warfare. Dwight D. Eisenhower himself said, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us." Think about that. A single inventor, a single design, changed the course of history. The landing craft may have been just boats, but they were the vehicles of victory. After the war, Higgins Industries continued to innovate, but the man behind the machines remained humble. He never sought medals or fame. His pride was in solving problems, in building things that worked, and in saving lives. Today, when historians study D-Day or Iwo Jima, they often focus on generals, soldiers, and strategy. But the truth is clear. The war was won on beaches, and those beaches were conquered thanks to one man's mind and his landing craft. Andrew Higgins died in 1965, largely unknown to the public, but his legacy lives on. Every amphibious assault, every beach landing in modern history, traces its roots back to his simple, brilliant idea. It's a story about ingenuity, courage, and quiet heroism. Proof that sometimes one man with an invention can change the fate of the world. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share it with someone who needs to see how innovation, courage, and thinking differently can leave a mark on history.